WWII, Scotland. Today, peaceful and calm. But during World War II, it was a hive of military activity, from where the Russian Arctic convoys departed. From WWII, they sailed into the Norwegian Sea and past the perilous Arctic Circle to reach the Russian ports of Murmansk and Archangel. To achieve this, sailors from the Allied nations braved terrible conditions, very rough seas, and freezing temperatures. Worse still, using their bases in Norway, German attack from the air and from the sea was a constant threat. Hello, and I wish you a very, very warm welcome. My name is Mr. Dilly, and this is Mr. Dilly's World of History. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Today's Mr. Dilly's World of History will be focusing on the role of the Royal Navy and the Arctic convoys during World War II. And we will be commemorating a very important naval battle of World War II, the 80th anniversary of the Battle of North Cape, which was a major victory on the sea for the Allies during the war. For this program, I will be joined by an author who has been described as one of the finest historical storytellers for children, Mr. Tom Palmer, who tells the story of the Arctic convoy in his book, Arctic Star. Tom will be co-presenting today's program with me, and we'll be discussing and answering some of your questions, and thank you for sending those in. We'll also be hearing from some of the veterans, some of the Arctic convoy veterans as well. But before I speak to Tom live, I'll hand over to Tom now, who is on location in London. So here we go. Here's Tom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dilly. So welcome everybody to London. As you can see over there are some London buses going over London Bridge. Here we've got the River Thames. On the other side of the Thames, there is the City of London, and here we have HMS Belfast, and beyond it, the iconic Tower Bridge. And it's HMS Belfast that I wanted to speak to you about now. This film that Mr. Dilly and I are making, this programme, is all about the history of the Royal Navy, and in particular this ship. This ship is HMS Belfast. It's now a museum that you can go on board and visit. It's one of the Imperial War Museum's museums, and it tells the story of the Royal Navy, in particular for us, relating to the Arctic convoys, which my book Arctic Star is all about. And what we want to do is take you on board and help you understand what it was like to be in the Navy during the Second World War, but also to remember that 80 years ago this month, in December, it was Boxing Day, 1943, HMS Belfast took part in a major battle called the Battle of North Cape, and we're going to be exploring that inside the ship and in conversation. So I hope you enjoy joining us on board HMS Belfast, and I shall, for the moment, I shall hand you back to Mr. Dilly.
So back to me, and you can see I'm here now, joined by Tom Palmer. Hello, Tom.
Hi,
nice
Mr. Dilly. Thanks for having me on board.
Oh no, it's an absolute pleasure, and we got lots of those videos from you on Belfast throughout the program today. So in a minute, I'm going to hand over to Tom. As I said, Tom's co-presenting today's show as well, and Tom's going to give us a bit of context about the Arctic convoys, but why they were needed in the first place. Lots not necessarily known about from this country's perspective of the Eastern Front. We know more about the Western Front and the home front, but the Eastern Front with Russia. So I'm going to hand over to Tom and talk a little bit about Russia and how Russia got involved in the war, and also then the Arctic convoys and what they did. We've got a few slides sort of like under Tom's words to sort of back that up. So I'll hand over to you, Tom, to sort of talk about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dilly. So during the Second World War, we the Allies and the British, with our allies, were fighting on the Western Front, so fighting Germany and occupied Europe from the west. But during sort of halfway through the Second World War, the Russians got involved because the Germans invaded Russia, and so the Russians were then fighting the Germans from the east. But the Russians needed more war materials to help them defeat the Germans. So they needed airplanes, fuel, ammunition, and vehicles. And so the Allies, the British and the Americans and others, we had to get those materials to Russia. And to do that, we had to sail up like the western coast, of Norway, or even around Iceland, right up to the top of Russia. There we go. There was a winter route and a summer route, and the Germans occupied Norway, so we had to sort of stay as clear as we could of that and deliver those materials to the Russians in their ports there in Murmansk and Archangel. And the book, like Arctic Star, the book is about that journey and how absolutely terrifying it was with U-boats, submarines, ships, German airplanes, and not just being attacked by the Germans, but being attacked by the seas and the ice. And it was absolutely terrifying. And when I was researching this, I couldn't believe what I didn't know. I couldn't believe that I didn't realize how frightening and horrific it must have been to be in the Navy during the Second World War.
And a lot of those things you touched on there, we're going to sort of explore into a wider sense a bit later on. But it's absolutely fascinating to see. We got a question for you here. So we've got various questions sent in from schools, and we sort of picked the ones that kind of make sense within the sort of context of the subject matter today, and they will be sort of throughout the show. So the first one is a good question. It's from Harlow Academy in Aberdeen. Why do you think that the Arctic campaign is not more widely known about? And I'll hand over to you for this, because obviously you've done the main research because of your book. So I'll hand over to you to sort of give us your thoughts on that.
I mean, it's a great question, isn't it? And like, I honestly don't know. I think like Britain's naval history is like well known, but once you get to the First and Second World War, there's like it seems to be a gap in what we know about history. And I've spoken to old sailors who've been involved in the Navy, and they feel the same. I think like the stories we've had of soldiers, like we think of the First World War, Tommy in the trenches, and like of airmen, we think of the Spitfire pilots in the Second World War. But the Navy seems to have missed out, and that is my answer. And the only reason I'd had written books about the Air Force, and I had written books about the Army. And the reason that I wrote this is because my wife used to work on board HMS Belfast, and she told me and said, "There's a gap, and people need to know what's happened." And when we meet,
it's true, isn't it?
Yeah,
but it's true. I mean, literally. I mean, your book actually. When did this originally come out? It came out a couple of 2 or 3 years back. Did it?
Yeah,
roughly a while ago.
I'd say it was like 2020, but I'll just check. It's 2021.
Yeah. 2021. Yeah. So this for me was an introduction to that as well. I'd never heard of it. Never heard of Arctic Star. And really, as I said, apart from the knowledge that obviously there were sea battles in the war, I didn't know really anything about it. I mean, you hear about land battles, so it's a strange one. But I actually think now this is really sort of coming to the fore now, in terms of our knowledge of it and our understanding of it and our interest in it, which is a brilliant thing. One of the thanks for your question, Brady, at Harlow Academy. That's amazing. Thank you. One of the things which you touched upon just in your introduction there was the conditions that these sailors were facing, and the weather conditions in a sense. There were all sorts of threats they were facing, but what were the threats of the weather conditions for them on that route?
Well, it was, and like they were often sailing up there in the winter, and the weather conditions were like extremely high seas, like huge waves that were crashing down over the ship, and then like the higher up you went into the Arctic Circle, the colder it got, and the more ice there was. So you'd have perfect timing, like astonishing amounts of ice, like on the ship, and you had to chip it off. You can see them there chipping it off, because if they didn't chip it off and they didn't go out there and chip the ice off, the ships would capsize. So they spent loads of time, and not just in perfectly calm conditions, like the sea would be like tossing the ship all over the place, but this ice would land, this icy water would land on the ship. It would form ice on the ship, and they had to get it off, or it would tip over. So you had all of that. You had the stormy seas, and you had mines in the water as well, and icebergy sort of chunks of ice as well that the ship had to avoid. It was absolutely horrific, and you really had to be on it. And like as you can see there, the guns are iced up. You had to make sure they were ice free, because otherwise they wouldn't work. And if a German ship came at you, your guns had to work. So they spent like hours and hours and hours just chipping ice off the deck and the guns.
It's absolutely terrible. I don't know if this is right, but it said if you fell in, we're going to go to a little video of you in a minute on the Belfast again, from the front of the ship, and you'll see from Tom's video in a minute just the guardrail, it was called, the sort of the fence around the ship to stop them falling into these water was kind of ridiculous, wasn't it? And if they fell in the water, it said they had a life expectancy of roughly 5 minutes. I expect that was quite generous, was it? If they fell in those waters?
Yeah, and like once you're in, like unless you were tied to a rope, like you had absolutely no chance of survival. Like it was so difficult. I know if you read the book, you'll see that there's like men fell in and they were never seen again. It was just absolutely horrendous.
Well, let's have a look at. Let's go back to you on the Belfast, and then you can sort of see the front of the ship, and you can see what Tom's talking about and the guardrail we're talking about here. So we go over to you, Belfast, and when we're back in just a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Dilly. So this is actually this is the front of the ship from the cover of the Arctic Star book, as you can see there, and that's looking out towards London Bridge just beyond there. And what I wanted to do was just show you the guardrail. The first scene in the book features the Frank, Joseph and Stephen on the guardrail, and the guardrail was basically this bit which went around the ship to stop men falling off, but they did fall off sometimes. It was very wild seas, and there was dramatic events. I just wanted to show you what the guardrail is and tell you why it's there, and read you the very beginning of the book. You do know that some men who go out on deck to clear ice are never seen again, don't you? Frank took a deep breath, ignoring his friend Stephen's remark, to focus on preparing himself for what was coming next. The wind, the waves, the danger. Frank had a hammer and chisel in one hand, while his other hand gripped the thick steel wire that ran the length of the ship from bow to stern. They were there for the men to hold on to in rough weather. He could already feel his freezing cold metal through his thick woolen Arctic gloves as the wind roared wildly around him. So that is the beginning of the book, and it's supposed to set up this fear. And like, I'm sat here in London on quite a lovely autumn day in London. Obviously we're on the Thames, so the seas are extremely flat. Just imagine what it would be like with a ship being tossed around, like with this guardrail, this piece of steel wire, the only thing between you and the Arctic Ocean, and absolutely inevitable death if you went in.
So thanks to Tom there, and we'll be bringing back Tom to talk live in a minute. I just want to play you now. This is one of we said we got some footage of some of the Arctic veterans that were served on these convoys. So as well as the threat from the weather, and you can see there that was absolutely extreme weather beyond belief. There was obviously threat of attack from the enemy, from German U-boats and from the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. So let's hear from one of these Arctic convoy veterans, a lovely man called Francis Lee, with his recollection. And he was 16 years old when he was on the Arctic convoy. So this is over to Francis Lee.
And that's where we were attacked by 10 U-boats. The sounds, the torpedoes, the depth charges were the worst. I went deaf for quite a while because I was below decks when a depth charge went off. The Commodore ship was sunk, and we were the Vice Commodore ship. Terrible. The amount of people that died and the ships that was sunk. There's something that never leaves me. I never forgot.
So that's Francis Lee there, and one of the things you'll see from all the veterans there was obviously they're lots of older gentlemen now, and how that's kind of stayed with them their whole lives. And Tom, I mean, what's incredible about that is that, as I said, he was 16 when he was on that first convoy, and he was on the convoys in 1943 as well. Was it kind of common for, I'm saying men, they weren't even men, boys, to be on those ships? Was that a common sort of age for that?
Yeah, I think there was to be under the age of 17 or certainly 18. I think they were either they were ship's boys and they did jobs around the ship, but technically, as far as I know, and I'd have to double check, they weren't involved in using the guns and all those sorts of things. But also, like, people lied about their age, didn't they, as they did in the First World War, to get into action because they wanted to be part of it. So there were people at age, and you see on the memorials the names of boys who died.
What was it? What was I mean? If you were saying, what was it? Were a lot of the crew just sort of then just young men, sort of like literally 20, early 20s, where that would be sort of
absolutely, yeah, very much, yeah.
Which is absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? We've got a couple of questions for you that sort of lead into your research. As I said, we've got some other clips of veterans as we go through, and obviously, your research for all your books. One of the things amazing about it is how you weave in so much really factual stuff, and you sort of weave it in so it's really naturally, and you're learning about. So you're engrossed in the story, you're engrossed in the characters, but you're learning about all these events and the equipment they used all the time, which is what our questions kind of reflect. So first one is let's put this up here, is Cornelius Vermuyden, school, Canvey Island. How much research do you have to complete before writing an account like this? Good question. Obviously it must be quite difficult, I imagine.
Great question. I mean, like, the Imperial War Museum is, HMS Belfast is part of the Imperial War Museum. Their website is also part of the museum, where we can all go and visit their museum every day on their website if we can get online. And their website is astonishing. I wrote this book during the first lockdown. I couldn't go out and research it. I normally visit places and go to places, but this book, I listened to like about 100 hours on the Imperial War Museum of men who'd fought on the Arctic convoys, and that was my initial research. And I took hundreds of pages of notes and tried to choose from those notes. But I also did a bit of I did some research into books to do with the Arctic convoys, or in one case, the Atlantic convoys, other books that have been written. So this is a book by a German called The Sinking of the Scharnhorst, about that battle. This is a book by, I think he was the Norwegian guy. He was involved. He was on the ships, but he wrote a novel about it, as did this Dutch writer. And I did loads of research finding those books, as well as listening to the real men's testimony.
Those books, they give you a very different perspective depending on what, I mean, not necessarily, not even just what side, but what country you're coming from and how the eyes you're looking through. Did you get a different feel about it, or not really?
To be honest, no. To be honest, and that includes the C.S. Forrester book, Greyhound, and the film.
Yeah.
To be honest, they all talked about it from the same perspective. They're all very straightforward, very honest, and they're almost like you've got a German guy and people from different countries on different sides, but they have a great respect for each other, even though they're trying to blow each other out of the water. So I didn't actually. I think they were really straightforward, and they didn't make up a load of nonsense. It seemed quite consistent, to be honest, which I thought was quite interesting, actually.
It's actually amazing how factually people do speak about it, and it's not, they're not emotional. They're emotional, but they it's recollected like it's just sort of happened yesterday, isn't it? It's incredible. It leads into the next question, which kind of echoes what you just said, but it's a good take on it. Door Primary School in Sheffield asks, when researching, how do you trust the evidence? Which is a great question. And Longfield Academy in Kent, what was it like doing the research for this book? You've spoken a bit about, just on that second one, you've spoken a bit about that, but maybe yourself, as you said, there's so much you can look at and read, and it's obviously pretty hard-hitting stuff, a lot of it. So maybe from that angle, when you're answering that question. So the first one, Door Primary School in Sheffield, when researching, how do you trust the evidence? I'll hand over to you for that one. Great question.
It's a really good point, and it's where it's coming from, isn't it? I think with these books, I did research into all the authors, and they all sailed on like Atlantic convoys, but in this case, the Arctic convoys, they were all involved in those, so they knew but these are fictional accounts, so they fictionalize it. And I know, having made up fiction from fact, that it's almost impossible not to corrupt it if you're writing fiction, just to make the story work better. And so the best thing for me, the best thing to trust is the primary sources, and that means the first source of information. And that, in the case of any war or historical related thing is the testimony of those who are involved, and then you hear the testimony of several people, like in my case, like dozens of men, and then I worked out, what I thought was like 100% sound, and but because it's their testimony, on the whole, you trust it because it is testimony. It is a primary source.
I expect back to what we're saying earlier. I expect they're sort of, the wrong word to say, happy to talk about it, but they they want to talk about it, and they want, especially as they get older, I suppose, in a sense. I mean, you hear about veterans who don't talk about things, and literally until they get older, they spend their whole lives don't talk about it, and then they talk about it. But it's such a massive part of their life, as you can see, and you will see from the veterans that are in there. Just that the answer that second bit. Sorry, Tom, that a little bit briefly, is that the research for the book, was that, obviously it's great you're hearing all this stuff and absorbing all this stuff, but in terms of emotion, it must be quite overwhelming, I expect, isn't it, to sort of hear all these people's lives?
Because the testimony you're listening to, they are audio recordings of men who've been involved in these conflicts. It might be 60 plus years later, and you can hear the emotion in the voice, and you don't just hear the story about the battle, you hear about where they were brought up, what their mum thought when they went off to war, and so them as people, and it does get quite emotionally involving. One thing I wanted to add was like to do with authenticity. So this book by C.S. Forrester, which was a novel, but also it was made into a film with Tom Hanks in it. And in the film, they've got this device where, to create more tension, the Germans are sort of tapping into the British radio, so they're sort of threatening them over the radio, saying Greyhound, we're coming to get you, and that sort of thing, and that's really dramatic in the film. That is really dramatic, but it was not possible. It didn't happen. So that film has already, to make the story more tense and make it makes it more inauthentic, and that's what you've got to be so careful with, because you're making up a story. You want, if you could just do that, then this would be so much more moving or exciting. And so you've got you
would think literally, given it was pretty tense enough as it is, as well, all these other things in it.
But what's the film? I mean, it's a great film, but
but it's interesting that, and it's also interesting, as you said, to know that. Otherwise, you could think, that must be factual, and put it in there, and it's completely wrong. Just quickly, so your characters in the book. How much of them is actually based on? You said you read 100 of testimonies, and I know you've met some of the veterans as well. How much is actually based on those veterans? Are they sort of an amalgamation, or are they on specific individuals?
Yeah, they're amalgamations. They're pretty much, I suppose you could call them composite characters made up of different people's memories. And I just selected the ones that I felt work best for the story. But I always do a scrapbook when I write a book, and I did have that picture of these guys, and I sort of thought I had them in mind, although I made them a bit younger. I like to have photographs, of all the stuff that's going on, just to help me make my characters more authentic. So, but they're made up from several men's memories.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to you on the Belfast now, and this is you on the flag deck, and you talk about the dangers of men faced again, and the link between listening to some of the men's stories from the archive, the Pre-War Museum archive, and then capturing that actually in your book. So let's go see Tom, join Tom again back on the flag deck of the HMS Belfast.
So this is the flag deck, and it was from here, sort of high up on the ship, that the men were on lookout constantly around the clock. They'd be on lookout for German aeroplanes, periscopes of U-boats, mines, and other perils that would come along to threaten the ship. And I tried to capture this because Frank, the main character in the book, his main duty is as a lookout. And so I just wanted to read you this bit, and that was inspired very much coming here. If you look here, thank you very much. If we look here, this is a fixed gun direction sight binocular, but you would also have, if you just wait there 1 minute, you would also have binoculars like these that the men would be using, and they would be looking for danger. And having listened to some of the men on the Imperial War Museum website talking about their experience on board the ship. This is what I wrote to try and capture that as much as you possibly can. The officer on his deck nodded as Frank took up his position. There was a layer of high cloud as they sailed east on the Arctic Ocean above the top of Scandinavia. The wild anger of the wind and waves was no more. Frank felt as if the sea was resting, like some enraged creature that had worked itself up then calmed, maybe sleeping before its next outburst. But it was cold, freezing cold. Frank liked his lookout post on the starboard side. His was the surface watch, which meant looking out across 90 degrees of sea from the lowest deck, using his binoculars to scan the dark waves, searching for the periscope of a U-boat, the shape of a mine bulging under the swell, or even a torpedo skimming towards the hull of the ship. Some of the 10 ways to die that Stephen, his friend, had described earlier. Other men would be watching the skies for condors and Stukas, the enemy's aircraft. And they were the dangers that were there, and that's what some of the men had to do. They had to spend their whole time on deck, on duty, looking for those sort of dangers coming up. And it's brilliant to come to this ship, this museum, to see the actual devices that they used to do that.
Okay, thanks to Tom. Now I'm George the Belfast. We're going to hear from another one of our veterans there, and then we're back with Tom. So this is a man called Chris King, about his experiences on the Arctic Conference.
It was frightening, there's no doubt about that. You know, the first time we had 40 torpedo bombers coming over like a swarm of locusts at about 400 or 500 feet above the water, almost like masthead height almost. And the commodore of the convoy decided to turn the whole convoy to face the torpedo bombers. So he hoisted the signal for the turn to starboard, but the two outer starboard columns, for some reason, didn't get the signal, or they were too busy looking at the torpedo bombers to do anything. And so they lost, I think it was 8 ships straight away from the torpedo bombers. And I think, as I've always said, my admiration really is for the merchant navy, because those men on those merchant ships, and I've seen them sinking, and it was a horrible sight. But, you know, they were doing their peacetime work day by day, and then suddenly they were confronted with the war, and they carried on their peacetime work, but in battle. So my memories really are so strong of those merchant navy guys and the ships that they were in. As I say, having seen several of them blow up in front of your eyes, it was a horrible sight. I'm very grateful that I survived. But yeah, it was a hard life, but I think it did me a power of good.
So Chris King there, incredible testimony. It's amazing hearing these people talk. And it's really quite, really kind of gets you. One of the things I find incredible about all these men is, and you can hear it in the way Chris finishes there, was basically saying, after all of that, I think it did me the power of good, which I don't know about you, is incredible. You know, these men, I mean, you must have come across in the reading of all the testimony, but obviously they show incredible, well, men, boys, you know, incredible resilience and also incredible dignity, you know, sort of respect of what they're talking about. Do you think in all that you're researching, just hearing these men today, there are any sort of lessons that, you know, we can learn from them as people and what they faced at all?
I think, like, and you can hear it in their voices sometimes. I've met survivors of various things, and sometimes you can hear it in the voice. There's emotion in there as well, but they want to, it seems to me, they want to tell the facts. Like, I've met Rolf, who we'll be meeting a bit later, and like they want us to know exactly what it was like, and they want me, and they want you, Mr. Dilly, to pass on their story without great drama and emotion, but just to say what it was like and why it happened and why they chose to be part of it. And I think it's really important. I think the important thing for me is that they want us to know, and that's why I think it's a great honor to meet these people and to help pass their story on, because most of them are over 100 now, aren't they? So.
Yeah, which is amazing. And they just, like all of us, one of the most important things is to be listened to, be heard, and be acknowledged, and say, yeah, hey, that happened, that did it. we can move on, but let's not forget it and the rest of it. Yeah, it's amazing the qualities these men show. We've got another question for you here now. Is St. Joseph and St. Bede RC Primary, Year 6 in Lancashire? Thank you for your question. Do you think that the Royal Navy are sometimes overlooked when it comes to learning about World War II? What's your thoughts on that?
I do. I don't know about you, but I definitely do. I think we learn a lot, particularly about the Battle of Britain, and we learn a lot about the home front, because as a war, the Second World War was like there was much more bombing of our cities and our infrastructure, whereas it was quite not that common in the First World War. But so there's we hear a lot about the home front, we hear a lot about the airmen, but we just don't hear about the Navy, which just astonishes me. In finding out what we're finding out now today, what we're talking about, like how brave must you have been to go on a ship? Like there was no, like, even in the trenches in the First World War, how horrific that was. You'd have time where you weren't at the front. You'd have times when there was nothing going off. In a ship at sea, you know that any second you could get hit by a torpedo, or any second the sky could fill with German airplanes, or the seas could get so high and rough that you're in constant danger for months. And like, it's absolutely unbelievable. We don't know more about it. And like, I'm really glad that my publisher Barrington Stoke let me do a book about the Navy, modernish Navy.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, really important. But I think what we said is that, you know, a lot of these stories are now sort of coming out, which are amazing to hear about. And we sort of said that at the beginning, especially about these convoys, but also just everybody and everyone. That's what's amazing. Everybody's got a story. You know, everybody's got their own story to tell, and that's what's so remarkable about this. But thanks very much, St. Joseph and St. Bede, for your question there. One of the things now we're obviously talking about today and commemorating this month of December 2023 is the events of December and Christmas 1943 and the Battle of North Cape, which the HMS Belfast was obviously a part of. In a moment, we're going to show your video, and we're going to show some other videos. It's your video, I think, from the torpedo room, the shell room on board the Belfast, which is quite a remarkable video from Tom in a moment. But just give us a little bit of background, because you reference it in the video. Give us a little bit background to what was actually the Battle of North Cape. And you mentioned in the video something called the Scharnhorst. So could you tell us sort of a little bit about what the battle is, and then what the Scharnhorst is, and then we can hear from you, and then we can go on to sort of explore that a bit further. So I'll hand over to you to talk about that.
Sure, thank you. So the Scharnhorst, and this is the book by the German guy about the Scharnhorst, was a major, like, I think the last big really major German warship. Like, it was a huge, like, ferocious thing with hundreds of guns that had the power to do extraordinary damage. And like the Allies, the British, like in this case, wanted to sink it. And one of the convoys was coming back from Russia with materials on board that we'd got from Russia, like wood and other things to bring back to the UK. And the convoy was coming back, and the Scharnhorst was coming, and they got word from the Norwegian resistance that the Scharnhorst was coming. So the British Navy, the Royal Navy, engaged the Scharnhorst just high above, as you can see, high above Norway. So that's the very top of Norway, and engaged with it. And it was a ferocious battle. The battle they went into to begin the battle on Christmas Day 1943, and the battle ended on Boxing Day 1943. And part of the whole build up to it was they weren't allowed their Christmas dinner, because they were on action stations, and then they all listened to the King's speech, and it was I don't know, like, there's something about like being away from at war at Christmas.
I'll tell you what we do is we're going to show Tom's video now, speaking a bit more about that from the shell room on the Belfast, and then afterwards Tom's going to read from his book, and he's going to give you the events across that Christmas Day, Boxing Day 1943, and in the middle of that also we're going to hear from King George VI, from the Christmas Day message that he gave there. So first of all, I'm just going to play Tom's video, and then we're back for a reading from Tom. Okay.
So this is the shell room, and the shell room doesn't actually feature in Arctic Star, but I wanted to bring you here because this is where the shells were set up to be fired at the other ships, such as the Scharnhorst, which features in Arctic Star. And I wanted to bring you here because there's a feature here that that's in Arctic Star called and it's called the drenching gear. And the drenching gear, when I heard about it, I really wanted to include it in the book because it's so dramatic. In my book, it happens in the engine room, but there's something I want to show you in a minute that relates to the drenching gear. So, basically, down here in the shell room and the engine room, if there was a fire on the ship, if the ship was in danger, the drenching gear would be opened, which meant this whole area would be flooded. In fact, I'll show you it now. So we're going to go into the other shell room, but there's speakers on there, so I'm not going to talk, but I just want to show you something on the wall, and then we'll come back in here and I'll read you a bit about the drenching gear, and then I'll show you something quite frightening, I think. Anyway, let's go through here. So through here, this is one of the others. You see this here where it says you are below the waterline. So if the drenching gear, if they filled this area with water to stop the ship setting fire and exploding more dramatically, the water level would go up to here. So if you're down here, you would be in great danger of being killed. So I just wanted to show you the waterline, and then we'll go back in here where it's a bit quieter. And I'll just read you the short bit about the shell room, and then... Sorry. This is badly. I suppose you're getting a good view of the shells, aren't you? Right, so here we are. So I just wanted to read you this bit about the drenching gear because it's so frightening. Basically, just to reiterate, the lower bits of the ship where they kept the shells and the explosives and the engine room, if there was a fire on the ship, they would blow up. So what they used to do was if that was going to happen, they would open the drenching gear, which meant they'd flood this whole area, and the men down here could well be killed. And this happens in Arctic Star. Open the drenching gear. The order came from the captain. Frank felt a sharp, sudden, acidic sting in his throat, and his mouth filled with vomit. Stephen. Drenching gear. He thought of Stephen in his boiler suit in the engine room, in the warmth of the engine room. He remembered clearly what his friend had told him about the 8th way to die. The 7 men working in the engine room, or in this case, the shell room, would have a minute, Frank knew, to endure freezing water that would now be closing in around them, with the hatches and doors sealed shut, and that would lift them off their feet, and they would tread water, still hoping for a miracle. Their heads would hit the ceiling, the water still rising, cold, monstrous. All the fires in the engine rooms would be extinguished, as would the lives of the men in there, of Stephen. And this is based on what I learned from the experts here at the Imperial War Museum, the HMS Belfast, but also from listening to recordings of the men and what they knew about what would happen in the shell room. And the last thing I want to show you, cordite is the explosive used in the shells, and it's got to be kept away from everything else. It's got to be really safe. And this is the cordite shaft or entrance, and like you could go down there. I'm not sure if you can see it. There you go. One man had to go down there, and if the ship was in battle, it was one man's job to be down that shaft. And obviously, if there was a fire on the ship, and if the drenching gear was enacted, that man would have absolutely no chance. And when he went down there during action stations, he would know that was the case. And in the case of this battle, during the Battle of North Cape, I believe he was a 17-year-old sailor. Anyway, I feel this is really important. It's what I wanted to capture in the book, and just to remember what those poor men went through and how brave and amazing they were to go through all that to keep the ship doing what the ship was built for. Anyway, thank you for listening. Back to Mr. Dilly.
Incredible. Thanks for Tom there. Amazing to see that, isn't it? Okay, before we actually bring Tom in live again, we do have another little video from Tom in a moment. But I'm going to just paraphrase. We're in the Battle of North Cape now. We're talking about that. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit from Tom's book, Arctic Star, over here. And this is about just December 1943, before we actually get to excuse me, the events of Christmas Day and Boxing Day in 1943, the 80th anniversary of what we're partly commemorating today. So I'll read from Tom's book. It's Lockhew, December 1943, and 3 cruisers steam out of Lockhew in the north of Scotland at 1300 hours on the 12th of December 1943, 2 weeks before Christmas. HMS Sheffield, HMS Norfolk, and HMS Belfast. Their mission to meet up with Arctic convoys in the high Arctic and escort them through U-boat infested waters. Scotland slides out of view as the seas build around them and the fog thickens. It was winter. The sea was wild even before HMS Belfast hit the open water. Great waves and howling winds. But while they perhaps did not have to fear the weather as much on board this vast fighting ship, they did still have to fear the Scharnhorst. The captain had told them as much before they cast off. The Scharnhorst, the monster ship that Hitler had sent to cut off the Arctic convoys for good, was waiting in the fjords of Norway to attack. So that gives you a little bit of convoy about, a little bit of context, about the feeling the men had as they set off that sort of nearly mid-December and before the events of Christmas Day. Now on that route, it's about a 2-week journey. And as far as I'm aware, from the fact that nothing actually happened on the way there. And we're going to have a little video from Tom now that shows where the men sort of rested and spent their time, if they could rest, on board the HMS Belfast, because the events take a sudden turn and they won't be resting for much longer. So we're going to show this video, Tom, and then we're going to be back, and Tom's going to sort of talk us through the events of Christmas and Boxing Day back in 1940.
This is the shell room, and the shell room doesn't actually feature in Arctic Star, but I wanted to bring you. Thank you very much, Mr. Dilly. So this is the mess deck, and this is where the men, when they weren't involved in lookouts and the other duties that they had on the ship, this is where they used to come to rest. You'll see up here, these are hammocks, and these would have come out and they would have slept on those, and this is where they would have eaten. And I think this is where they would have heard the King's speech, which we're going to hear in a little while. When before they went into battle on Boxing Day 80 years ago, the men would have been sat here waiting to be sent to their action stations on the ship, and they would have heard the King's speech over the speakers, and that would have been really moving to them. I think when you hear the King's speech, you'll see what I mean. But I think this is a really important part of the ship to come to, because this is where the men came to rest, if you possibly could, but they'd be here with dozens of other men as well, and it wouldn't be that restful with it, would it? But that's what it was like, being on a ship in the Royal Navy for weeks, months at a time.
Okay, so Tom's back with us live again now, Tom. So I'm going to hand over to Tom now. So Tom's going to, well, he can explain what he's going to do, but I think it's the events sort of leading up to the battle. And in the middle, we're going to hear the speech that was actually made that Christmas Day from the King himself.
The Barents Sea, Christmas Day, 1943. And then it was Christmas Day, the first one Frank would spend without his mum. It didn't feel great, and he knew she'd be missing him too, on her own at home. But he tried to comfort himself with the thought that surely the war would be over by next Christmas, if they did what they had to do. Surely next year he and his mum would be together again to celebrate. You had to think like that during wartime. Christmas dinner on the Arctic Ocean was a bully beef sandwich and some dried biscuits. Conditions were too rough for a proper feed, but they'd been promised a real Christmas dinner once the seas were quiet. The ship was at a second degree of readiness, one level below action stations. They knew something was coming. Danger, conflict, war. An hour to go until the late afternoon watch began. There was a crackle on the tubes and the captain's voice sounded. Some of the men were already on their feet. Was it time? Frank asked himself. Was this it? Action stations. The captain began by wishing them a Merry Christmas. Then he asked them to join him in listening to the King's Christmas message that he was going to relay to them live from home by radio. As the national anthem crackled over the ship's broadcast system, Frank stood up as he always had been told to. Several men joined in, singing in low voices, looking at their feet or hands. Then, after the Christmas music faded, the King's Christmas 1943 message began, his voice faltering, hesitating before going on.
And once again, from our home in England, the Queen and I send our Christmas greetings and good wishes to each one of you all the world over. Some of you may hear me on board your ships, in your aircraft, or as you wait for battle in the jungles of the Pacific Islands or on the Italian peaks. Some of you may listen to me as you rest from your work, or as you lie sick or wounded in hospital. To many of you, my words will come as you sit in the quiet of your homes. But wherever you may be, today, of all days in the year, your thoughts will be in distant places and your hearts with those you love. I hope that my words, spoken to them and to you, may be the bond that joins us all in one company for a few moments on this Christmas Day.
After the speech, the men turned to each other and shook hands, but none spoke. Frank felt shattered, but energised too. He was thinking about his mum, at home, alone, listening to this speech on the wireless. He knew she would be thinking of him listening to the speech too. In the quiet below the decks, from one, two, then several places in the ship, he heard singing, floating up the corridors and down ladders. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. Christmas Day, 1943, as HMS Belfast ploughed on through the waves. They were all thinking about the Scharnhorst, every man on the ship, but few mentioned it. It lay beneath the surface of every conversation and gesture, like a U-boat biding its time. The North Cape, Boxing Day, 1943. Frank and Stephen were off watch and in the mess deck eating breakfast at 07:55 hours on Boxing Day when the announcement came, the captain over the tubes. The men got to their feet like the last time and with good reason. The captain explained he had received an intelligence report from Norway via Britain that the Scharnhorst was on the move. The German battleship was coming out to engage with the Arctic convoy. This was it. Stephen stood up and pulled a face just as the ship's alarm went off to indicate action stations. Calm and orderly, tight smiles on their faces, Frank and Stephen prepared to leave the mess room. Another crackle on the tubes. It was the chaplain of the ship this time, his voice slow and calm. The Padre spoke about God, he spoke about country, he spoke about sacrifice. Then he finished with a prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. After the chaplain spoke, rum was brought to every man. In bleak, tense silence, without the comforting words of the chaplain echoing off the deck, Frank stared out into the void, scanning the horizon for the first sighting of the Scharnhorst, but also checking squares of dark sea for U-boats. To his side, he could see the silhouette shape of HMS Norfolk a mile away from them, and beyond that, he knew HMS Sheffield was with them too. 3 cruisers heading to harass the formidable Scharnhorst, separating from the convoy now, taking the fight to the enemy before it annihilated dozens of merchant ships, steaming north. Time passed. Nothing for half an hour. 90 minutes. Frank was beginning to wonder if the battle would ever start, when suddenly a star shell exploded above them, lighting up the whole sky, forcing men used to scanning darkness to cover their eyes. "Gentlemen," the captain announced over the tubes, "we are about to engage the Scharnhorst. Be ready and know that the prayers of our nation and families are with you tonight."
I was drafted ashore at midnight on the end of December 43 from HMS Hardy. My action station was at the stern, releasing depth charges. 29 days after I left, she was on her next run to Murmansk. U-boat 278 fired one of the latest German torpedoes, which were acoustic. And she struck the stern of Hardy and blew the stern off. So my 12 close mates were written off on the 29th of January 1944. That colored my life, frankly.
Rolf Monteith there, who has recently celebrated his 100th birthday, and I believe you've you've met Rolf. In fact, I think you showed a picture of him earlier on. Can you tell us a little bit about him and your meeting with him?
Yeah, this is Rolf. This is Rolf when he was a young sailor, and this is Rolf a bit later on, and you saw probably a more recent film of him. And I read his book, and I interviewed him, and he told me his story, and it's just like I'd heard so many stories like by listening to them online on audio files, but meeting one of the men in person and just meeting with them and spending time with them, it has a profound effect on you. And like whenever I'm doing history, I always try to meet the people. Just I don't know. It feels like you're closer to the story. And he's a lovely guy, and like the best
primary source as well, isn't it? As you were talking about earlier, is that you got that first hand evidence of what you're talking about. He says, and I've touched on this a couple of times during today's program, but how the events of that colored his life, and all these things colored all their lives, which is an incredible thing. And as I said, he's now 100 in the last few weeks, I think it was. So happy belated birthday to you, Rolf. Your reading there took us up to the events right before the battle. Can you sort of? I know it's a complicated kind of battle, but could you sort of tell us a little bit about what actually sort of happened in the battle? So over to you, Tom.
Yeah, and like these battles, and I didn't have a clue, but these battles were done at long range. The ships were like sometimes miles apart, and they'd be lining up and shelling each other. And the three main ships, and I should have checked my sources again, but I believe HMS Sheffield, HMS York, and HMS Belfast, and possibly HMS Jamaica as well. I need to check, and that's why it's really important to check and double check your facts all the time. They engaged with the ship, and eventually they struck it, and eventually they sunk the Scharnhorst, which was a major battle in major victory in the Second World War, because it really reduced the impact that the German Navy. What's the German Navy?
Well, there was because there was actually. I mean, it didn't go easy, did it? The Scharnhorst. I mean, it took like as you said, there was 03. We said the Sheffield, Norfolk, and Belfast, and then as you said, there was the Duke of York, so there was like 6 of them. Is that right? They had it in sort of pincer movement, sort of firing at it. Yeah. And so it was a hard thing to sink, wasn't it?
It was, and I think like certainly some of our ships were struck during that battle, but eventually they sunk it, and it was highly significant in the war.
It was a massive turn. I don't think, and you'll know better than I, that the Germans ever built a ship like that again, did they? That was kind of the top thing that they did, and that was the end of it, wasn't it? So it was a sort of a turning point, especially for that and in those seas at that time. So it was a really big deal in terms of that, wasn't it? Which is, and that's why
naval superiority, as it's called, like like once you can dominate them without a ship like that, in the waters, you can dominate the seas, and then everything starts to change. Although their U-boats were horrific, but that's another story.
Horrific. It must be a huge relief for the men. Let's have a look a bit at this footage. About 45 seconds, a bit of footage, and then we got a couple more questions for you as well. And so let's have a little look at what maybe a naval battle could roughly be like. Here we go. So that gives you a little sort of bit of feeling of the sinking of the Scharnhorst there. We've got a couple more questions for you, Tom, and we also got a couple of snippets more of our veterans before we finish today. So this is a great question, and I'm going to try and pronounce this as best as I can. So hopefully I've got it right. Is it Colle Crag? I think it is that in Anglesey. What is the most interesting fact you know about the Boxing Day battle? If you have a sort of particular fact that kind of
I suppose the one that jumps into my mind, I don't know, like the one that came into my mind, which I think is the best thing to talk about, is how the last scene in the book is one of the last scenes in the book is when the men on board HMS Belfast see in the water where the Scharnhorst was lots of little red dots of light, which kind of, because it was night, lots of like the stars in the sky, and each little red dot is one of the German sailors in the water, and in most cases freezing to death. And like the mood changes from victory, thank God we've sunk that ship, we've not been sunk, to pity and empathy for the men in the water. And that really stuck with me, hearing that said over again. And I've got this picture from that I've got from somewhere. This is some men. It wasn't many men. I can't remember exactly how
I've got it here, and you can verify this. So this is right. I've got that there. Of the crew of 1,968 officers and enlisted men on the Scharnhorst, only 36 men survived.
Right.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think so. And this is some of them like being taken off. So they fished them out of the sea and then took them off the ship, and they're just for security they've been blindfolded. But you know they were in a way there was a camaraderie between the sailors of the ships, even though they were spending most of the time trying to blow each other out of the water. In the same way, there was a camaraderie between the Luftwaffe and the Royal Air Force. There was a respect, because it's very strange, but they're doing the same. It's very strange, yeah.
It's really odd. I mean, you can't get your head around it. You can't get your head around it. You know, it's quite something else. We got another question for you, but before we get your thoughts on this question, so I'll put the question up, and before we answer it, so Ridgeway Secondary School in Redditch, why do you think it is still important to write about war? And I suppose you can extend that into talking about war or anything about war in terms of that. We're going to go back to a video of Rolf, who we met earlier and Tom spoke about. He's going to show you his medals and also speaks about why it's important to him to remember that. So over to Rolf, and then we're back to answer that between us.
If you did time in World War II, from 6 months on, you were awarded these. And of course, at the end are the other medals, are the Russian medals. I view them as terribly important. The only really important one is the Arctic Star. But it strikes me that peace comes, memories fade, the public has other priorities, all understandable. Remembering them is the least that I could do in memory of people who paid the price.
So that's Rolf there about why he remembers. So let's put the question up for you, Tom. I mean, if you don't mind, I mean, for me personally, I mean, we're making these programs together, and you know, I've interviewed Tom before, and a big fan of his books. And if you haven't read any, do get them. They're obviously great stories, but they are a huge testimony to the men and women throughout the wars and the effects and also just their life and their stories. For me, it's about sort of the respect of that and the sort of the honor of that sacrifice and the people in situations I couldn't possibly imagine being in. And yeah, as we can see today, that they come through them on the other side. A lot of people, obviously, it's a hugely traumatic thing that, as Rolf said, colours their lives, but also that they do come through it, and so light sort of prevails in the end. And I think it's a great testimony to all of us in our own lives, and a great example for all of us. So that's what I feel. Tom, obviously you're the writer, and the question is about writing. Well, why do you think it's important to write about the war? So I'll hand over to you about that.
Yeah, and completely agreeing with you and Rolf, what you've said about remembering the past, but also, and that's a really important part of it, but also making us aware of the present and the future. We know there are wars and conflicts around the world now, and civilians as well as the military suffering terribly. And I think, like, if we learn about war, like, that's happened in the past, or even more, more recent wars, if we learn that, then we know more what war is like. Like, I've lived in this country my whole life. I'm 56, and I've never been in a situation of war, and all those other countries where war is happening. Yes, like Rolf has said, like, we forget, we go on with our lives, but we have to be conscious of what war is, and, like, to stop it happening for us, but to try and stop it happening for other people, and seeing it through the eyes of one young person, a civilian, or someone in one of the forces, for me is my way of doing it. I'm not just remembering the past, but I am remembering the past, which is really important, but I'm also trying to make me understand and think about war, and maybe some of the people who read my books.
Fantastic. We've got it's a last clip of a veteran we haven't seen before, called David Craig, and he's talking about from his perspective, the human cost of the Arctic convoys. We already just mentioned about the casualties on board the sinking of the Scharnhorst, and Tom said about that sort of sense of euphoria and victory, and then followed by the sort of, like, the sense of seeing these people just in the water, other human beings. So I'm going to hand over to David, and then we're just going to finish with our final thoughts in the show. So over to David.
We were in what was called the Forgotten Convoy. You see, the days were beginning to get lighter. And after we got into Russia, I think they decided it was getting too late. That was in the end of February. It was getting too late to risk a convoy in the way up. So they just forgot us, and we had to survive as best we could. And we also had malnutrition, and but very fortunate, though we were anchored for 3 months within 10 kilometers of the German lines, and were attacked nearly every day. But we had the ship damaged, and when 10 got stuck together and back out again. But we only had one man wounded. We lost nobody off our ship. I lost a friend up on our ship. But that was the way it was. We were anchored within 10 kilometers of the German lines, and we got bombed one day, and the bomb went through the deck. I was blown up, and when I landed, fortunately, on deck instead of going over the side, when I struggled back to my feet, there was a nice round hole in the steel deck within 3 yards of where I was lying, and it happened to be one of the bombs that hadn't gone off, and it's only one that didn't go off in the whole period we were there. So I wasn't meant to die at that time. The worst day we had was 3 attacks, but that was an exception. That was only one we had that. And we had the ship damaged a few times, went back into dock and got stuck together, and went back out and got damaged again. But that was the way life was, and you just accepted it. We lost 3,000 men on the convoys. I think it was 2,000 Royal Navy men, and there was, fortunately, we lost 104 merchant ships sunk in the Barents Sea and the Arctic Ocean.
So there's the cost there. At the end of the war, 104 merchant Navy vessels were lost at the end of the Arctic Convoys particular campaign. The Royal Navy lost 24 warships, and overall 3,500 Allied servicemen lost their lives as part of the Arctic Convoys. So that's the end of this special Mr. Dilly's World of History today, commemorating the men of the Royal Navy who served on the Arctic convoys during World War II, which included, obviously, on HMS Belfast, of course, and is immortalised in Tom's wonderful book, Arctic Star. Tom, do you have any final words or thoughts today about any of the show, or you want to leave the children with, or any of our veterans, or anything else like that?
I'd just like to say thank you to you for putting this program together. I think it's like, obviously I try to write books to tell stories, but you're creating programs that and bringing in all that material. So thank you. I think it's
a pleasure.
Really valuable.
No, it's really valuable, and just to say to all of the teachers watching that this will be available across the whole of December for you to watch, or you can share with other people, and so it'd be a great resource to have, and a real testimony to those men who are celebrating this, or commemorating this anniversary. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now. There's a couple of things I want to just show you, all of you, just towards the end of the show. But for now, thank you very much, Tom. It's been wonderful hosting this event with you. And speak again. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dilly, and everyone for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So thanks to Tom Palmer there, and thank you for you all for watching. As I said, this program will be available for you to watch across the whole of December. We have a final question, which I'm actually not going to answer because I'm going to show you it instead. It's St. Joseph and St. Bede, RC Primary, Year 5 in Lancashire. Is there a memorial to those who sailed aboard the Arctic convoys? Well, in a moment, you're going to actually see that memorial as we finish today. And please do watch the credits. There's some great pictures in there and some wonderful music. And you'll see the memorial itself. So it's just time for me to say thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Dilly, from Mr. Dilly's World of History. Thank you to Tom Palmer. And obviously, my thanks to all the veterans for their clips today, and for the service they gave us all those years ago. And it's goodbye from me, and have a good Christmas. Thank you.